welcome back. This is episode 6 of the Late Stage Podcast, and I am, of course, your host, Sinan Schwarting, live from New York City. I've got another fun episode with you this week. As you can see here, I am coming live from Christmas. I hope everyone who's out there listening had, if they celebrate Christmas, a Merry Christmas. If they celebrate Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah. Kwanzaa, even if you're not celebrating anything, if you just have time with your family, I hope that's going well, or as well as that can go in some cases. I have no guests this week, and that's intentional. I figured I probably shouldn't put that pressure on myself to have a guest every week in case it's not particularly easy on any given week. But additionally, and in this case, it felt especially apropos or appropriate. During the holidays, I thought people didn't really want to be bothered with this type of stuff. I wanted to give everyone a chance to be at home and not worry about doing any work, any recording of any sort. So, so this week, it's just me. No sort of main topic or anything of that sort. Spin Garfield here. So that's my co-host this week. So besides that, I'm going to cut to the chase. First of all, cheers. For this holiday episode, I'll be having a little bit of a drink. And hopefully I'll record this fast enough without too many hitches that I don't feel the effects until later. But we shall see. Happy holiday. Cheers. Anyhow. Let's just dig right in. And I'm going to try to cut down on the length of my episodes in general, but today we're gonna try some new things. No table of contents. We're just gonna dive right in and talk about the latest. And this week we're gonna start in Africa, which is not a particularly rare occurrence for the most part. We're gonna start in Central Africa, or the Central African Republic, where it's just a sort of news story. It's not a particularly exciting one. The United States Department of State has imposed sanctions on a militia leader who goes by the name of Ali Darassa, which in and of itself, fine, right? Like, not particularly big news. But I think in light of sanctions in Afghanistan that have caused mass starvation, for example, it's an example of sort of how one can target sanctions to actually kind of directly impact a bad actor, if you will, and how you don't necessarily have to sort of you don't have to sanction in sort of wide swaths that sort of impact people to the extent that they have Afghanistan, for example. So just sort of relevant in light of other news around the world regarding sanctions, that the U.S. has sort of effectively sanctioned an individual who is a militia leader in C.A.R, or Central Africa. It's worth noting that the United Nations has an arms embargo on C.A.R as well. So this government being sanctioned is not particularly novel by any stretch. But it's happening. Global sort of sanctions are being placed on this small nation. And I think the logic behind just sanctioning an individual rather than the nation, as they've done like Afghanistan and other places, is that C.A.R is notoriously struggling, poverty-stricken, all rife with all sorts of issues, political instability. There's sort of a running list of problems. I had a friend actually who was doing work with an NGO there. It's just tons of stories that were harrowing. But anyhow, so I think with the notion that you don't want to hurt these people who are already hurting so much by sanctioning in wide swaths the way they do in other places, they show the ability to do that. And I think that's, for anyone who's worried about Afghanis, for example, there's a way one can perhaps approach things. Anyhow, moving on, continuing in Africa, and on to some good news, because it's the holidays, right? And why not? South Africa is reporting a fairly significant decrease in COVID cases, which is obviously very important. South Africa was the sort of epicenter of the Omicron variant initially. Supposedly is where it came from. Of course, that's not. We don't know that exactly, right? But first of all, it's worth noting, I mentioned last week that the UK was taking South Africa and I think 11 other nations off of their travel, red list. The United States is following suit, taking South Africa and 7 other nations off of that list. So good news on that front, I think, as far as how that impacts them economically, politically, and all that, in light of the fact that the Omicron virus is, I think the last I saw in New York, it's already up in the 90% as far as the amount of cases here that are Omicron, So, yeah, it doesn't make much sense to sort of be banning anyone in the name of them bringing Omicron when that's already the dominant variant here. So that's off. That's good news. And additionally, the Omicron variant sort of spike seems to have peaked in South Africa. And of course, that's fantastic news because it suggests that perhaps this is sort of being resolved there, that perhaps the data that has suggested that the Omicron is slightly weaker could be true. First of all, that still has not been taken off the slate by any stretch. And additionally, that this was a sort of short peak and it's already sort of quickly dropping in South Africa seems to be really good news. So, cross your fingers. That would be a holiday, a Christmas miracle, if you will. But yeah, so moving on to Europe, where along with the news that numbers are going down in South Africa, numbers are going down in Denmark and Norway as well, which is also good news. Those were countries sort of struggling of late. And so more positives all around. I think we can say Europe is locking down, a bit in certain places. I've mentioned that in previous episodes. But with numbers going down, perhaps that'll ease eventually. So good news all around regarding COVID, I think we can say. Now, other good news, probably, is also out of Europe, coming from Pfizer, and that is that the Paxlovid pill can now be used to treat coronavirus after you've been diagnosed with it, and it has like a 90%, 92% rate of success of keeping people out of hospitals. So more good news on the COVID front, also coming out of Europe in this case. And so, yeah, you can't say enough about that. Obviously, with the New Year's coming, we would love nothing more than for 2022 to have no COVID issues. Obviously, that's beyond wishful thinking, but with good news bringing us into the new year, perhaps, that'll continue. Apologies for New York City throwing up a curveball. It's quite late, so I had to cut that. I got beyond annoying and loud. So apologies for that. Hopefully that wasn't too loud on the on the back end. I'll have to deal with that in post. Anyhow, moving along from Europe to Central and South America, and staying in the vein of COVID news, and in fact, good news. Again, this holiday episode, we're keeping it almost exclusively to good news here. So Cuba has notoriously, say what you will about the politics of the nation, the Castro regime, autocracy, communism, whatever it is that you have your opinion on Cuba based in. One well-known fact is that the medical industry there, medicine in general, have a fairly high quality for whatever reason. You'd assume because of education, resources, whatever it is that's been provided to medicine specifically. The results are notoriously pretty good. Along those lines, Cuba, not wanting to rely on the U.S. because of, speaking of sanctions and embargo, decided to make their own vaccine and kind of go heavy on research and development quickly. And the results were good. They vaccinated 89% of Cuba at one point. I think they've surpassed 90% now. And that's of everyone above the age of 2, interestingly. And their vaccine has a 92% rate of success, keeping people out of hospitals. So undoubtedly positive numbers coming out of Cuba. And so supposedly now they're trying to make efforts to distribute their version of the vaccine outside of Cuba, obviously with the notion of it being something very helpful to the world. We'll see if news will come in on that, but obviously that would be a very positive development. And, what can you say? Well done, Cuba. Moving along next to Chile, where we mentioned last week an upcoming election was going to take place between Gabriel Boric, very notably leftist candidate, supposedly, and in part this was painted by his opposition, but supposedly the most leftist candidate since Salvador Allende, who is a name many will recognize in Chile's history, was murdered by Pinochet. And he went up against a very far right-wing candidate by the name of Jose Antonio Cast, who openly supported Pinochet, as far right as they come as well. And so with this very consequential election taking place, the numbers are in, and they're good because here we are. It's the holiday episode. What can I say? Gabriel Boric won with 55.87% of the vote. His opponent got 44.13%. So a fairly landslide victory for a candidate painted as far left. So all around great news out of Chile. Cheers to the people over there. And I actually wrote an article for the Late Stage Tribune about the rise of these new governments of the left in South America, Central America. So this is obviously another notable victory in that regard. Check out that article. I'll put up an image there for that here as well. But moving on, and this is actually something of a correction. Now, in my Patreon episode, this is my second Patreon episode, which I just released on Christmas Eve, and it was the full interview with Matthew William Carter about the residential schools in Canada. And I did some sort of small news art pieces about Armenia and Turkish normalized relations. And then also, very briefly, I talked about New Zealand, my first Oceania news story. So I talked about how they banned their youth from smoking cigarettes, which doesn't sound like much in most of the countries we live in. I would assume young people can't buy cigarettes, right? So I wasn't particularly clear about what this ban meant. And I think it wasn't particularly clear to me. And since I did that piece, it's come to light that when we say that they've banned young people, they're not banning them as young people, they're banning them from this point on. So anyone born after the year 2023 or whatever year it was, and I forget that, so sorry, but still being a little imprecise here, but they will no longer have any access to cigarettes for the rest of their lives. So it's essentially putting a cutoff on people's access to cigarettes. Obviously, I think a lot of people will make the sort of claim that that's heavy-handed. For myself, a former smoker who has quit and it was not easy. I can say that I don't personally mind it. Smoking is such a terrible habit. I'm not enough of a libertarian to think that that's necessarily something that should be made available, in light of the fact that other substances are not available, some of them that have far greater benefits, or I should say not available universally, obviously in some places. Anyway, getting off topic. Point being, a bold move from New Zealand. We'll see how that pans out, if there's a kickback. But yeah, Oceania on the map. And staying in that region, and sort of now moving to Asia. Some people lump Oceania in with Asia. Certainly in the FIFA, they do for World Cup qualifiers and stuff like that. But anyway, here is where the episode takes a stark turn. Briefly, just because I think this is something folks need to be made aware of. In Southeast Asia, there are just terrible weather events occurring that I was mostly unaware of, and I think most people are, just based on the lack of coverage, and that's what we're here for. So Malaysia, there's serious flooding. Philippines, a typhoon. And in Indonesia, a giant earthquake. All of them sort of in quick succession hitting the region. Terrible news, obviously. More to come on that. There's not a lot of information at the moment as far as numbers and data yet, because this is all fairly fresh. So yeah, stay tuned on that. Perhaps I'll return with news on the next episode next year. And turning the dial back down to the holiday episode where things are positive and cheery again, very briefly. That little brief moment of dark clouds. But to North America, where I still owe Canada. I did that negative story on them with the residential school with Matthew William Carter I was just mentioning. And since I just put my Patreon episode out there for free, and I actually made our first episode available as well, which was the interview with Matthew Miranda of Jacobin Sports. I'm going to do Canada a solid here and report some good news coming out of Canada. New news, in fact, which may be under many people's radar. The Canadian government is paying $8 billion. And I can't confirm if that's US dollars, Canadian dollars. Either way, it's a huge sum. And they're paying it to various indigenous groups for efforts to clean their water supplies, which have been tainted and are dirty. So more sort of reparations towards the indigenous peoples of Canada, which, in light of the stuff we talked about with residential schools, relevant, I would say, a positive sign from the government. And it's worth noting that even that story about residential schools is a story because the Canadian government is attempting to do something about that. So to right their wrongs. There's a model for everyone during this holiday season. Christmas trees, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but so that is it for my news this week. Told you I promised it would be a quickie. No interview, so it's obviously a lot easier here to do that. First of all, power rankings. We're going to talk, obviously, once again about U.S. corporate news and the talking points this week that sort of dominated the news feeds, the headlines. First of all, the Senate, and they were in our rankings last week as in the fifth ranking. They're all the way up to number one. I mentioned there was like a talk of the Build Back Better plan not being passed before Christmas. Joe Manchin tanked the whole thing. He nixed the whole thing pretty much like the day before Christmas, or the day before Christmas Eve. So as far as coal in one stocking, it's worth noting that he has his wallet in the coal industry, so he wouldn't mind coal in his stocking probably, but he's certainly basically put coal in a lot of other people's stocking, including probably the Democratic parties, who will be the most negatively impacted by a lot of programs being taken off their payroll, essentially taken out of their bank accounts right as this inflation problem is hitting. We'll see how it goes. But so yeah, that's the number one topic in the news. I'm going backwards this week because I'm cutting right to the chase. This holiday season, nobody really wants to dilly-dally. Number two this week, COVID. up from number, or I should say down from number one last week. COVID, obviously, with the holidays, people rushing to get tests, rushing to get the boosters. There's some trouble here in the U.S., delays, long lines, nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Also, obviously, the Omicron stuff and news about travel being loosened again and numbers going down and potentially this variant being a bit less virulent. So, again, fingers crossed, but that's been number two in the news this week. Number three, Christmas stuff. And they always do these end of the year segments and they have their staff and everything. And that's dominated much of the week, sadly, for the rest of us. That's wasn't on the power rankings last week. Number four, Trump, staying in there. He was number three last week, so he's down a little. Just given that there's not a ton of news, but just more court stuff, court orders, supposedly some pushback. They're trying to sue back. They're trying to sue the January 6th commission to avoid having to show up for it. A number of people who've been called in and just delay tactics and the like. We'll see what happens with it or not. I'll just keep mentioning it in this little power ranking segment. I don't think I'm going to focus too much on it. And lastly, weather. Last week, weather was number two because of giant tornadoes. This week, it's a different news story. Storms, winter storms, delaying travel for the holidays. Storms that have killed some folks in Seattle, where they're not particularly used to snow. Snow, generally speaking, that we had a white Christmas Eve here in New York, for example. So it's a light news week, as you'd expect with the holidays here. But so that's what's dominated the news headlines this week. And I'll keep it short, as I'm trying to do as a theme throughout this episode. Finally, the weird of the week. And I had a whole thing planned for that with like the news, and then I stumbled across this. Guess who was born on January 3rd, 2003? Two 18-year-olds who couldn't be more dissimilar. One of them goes by the name of Greta Thunberg, a well-known climate activist and concerned citizen. The other is Kyle Rittenhouse, murderer / mistaken gunslinger, whatever, however you classify him. You couldn't think of two more polarizing opposite figures. And it's just so weird to me that they're both born on January 3rd in 2003. So that's definitely my weird of the week. I don't think that can be topped for a while. But anyhow, beyond that, happy holidays, folks. Merry Christmas if you celebrate. Happy Hanukkah. I know it's just finished. Kwanzaa is just beginning. Excuse me. Just again, even if you're not celebrating anything, it's a good time of the year to get together with your family, take stock of things, New Year's resolutions and the like. With Christmas now over and New Year's on the horizon, I doubt I'll be back before the new year. So happy New Year's, folks. Happy holidays. And see you next year. Peace out, everyone. Oh, yeah, and follow us at Late Stage Trib. Follow myself at Sir_Writes_a lot. Peace out, folks. Peace on earth, That's the one good sort of Christmas vibe that we can all take from that particular holiday. Anyway, have a good one. See you next time.